So today I'm going to read one of the best essays I've ever read. It was by a former student from many years ago, and even in its draft form, it's still a very solid essay. He was accepted into the University of Chicago in addition to other top schools, and once you see the essay, you'll see why. Now, the prompt that he chose was an old prompt that isn't used anymore. The prompt goes, describe a character in fiction, a historical figure, or a creative work, as in art, music, science, etc., that has had an influence on you, and explain that influence. After I give my reaction, I'll give my review using my 3 E's metric. Engagement, which is how well the essay keeps my attention. Engineering, which is how well the essay was structured. And execution, evaluating the essay at the sentence level. And if you'd like me to read your essay and review it on YouTube, I'll leave a link in the description. It's totally free, no strings attached. All right, let's get started. So, whereas Hobbes asserted that in the state of nature, man's life was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, Rousseau, in his discourse on inequality, claimed that in the state of nature, man had uncorrupted morals. As a teenager, Rousseau's writings made a deep impression on me, because they seemed to suggest that prior to the formation of society, men were virtuous. This idea encouraged me to question and sometimes to defy all social conventions as an imposition on the natural man who I began to imagine myself to be. See, that's a great first paragraph. I mean, this has already got me hooked because, it tells me that he's intellectually curious enough that he wants to test ideas in his life and not just, pontificate upon some philosophical quote and just talk about how it might have changed his thinking. This is setting up the idea that what I'm about to read is how he's going to test Rousseau's writings in his daily life. And that makes me want to keep reading. It also shows that he has a level of understanding of not just one philosopher, but two, Hobbes and Rousseau. I might be biased here, but as somebody who majored in philosophy, this stuff is just right up my alley, especially Hobbes. Like, I read a lot of Hobbes in my classes because one of my favorite professors was an expert on Hobbes. Yeah, I don't have much else to say about it. Honestly, it's really good. After reading Rousseau, I decided to stop sugarcoating my responses to people. Okay, at Hawthorne School, the English boarding school I attended, my homeroom teacher asked me what I thought of him. He was infamous for his conservative educational philosophy. He still carried a cane as a reminder of the good old days before corporal punishment had been abolished. Okay. Believing that he expected as sincere and objective an evaluation as possible, I told him that I thought he was inflexible and stubborn. In response, he unconsciously twitched his eyebrows, and after fidgeting for a few seconds, he waved me away. From that moment, his door was forever closed to me for one-on-one meetings. Again, see, what's great about this paragraph is that it's very specific. In my last critique, I talked about how they spent a lot of time summarizing what happened and the effect that it had on him and how he felt about it. But it was very amorphous and non-specific because he didn't talk about anything real. He didn't talk about any particular scene that made him feel this way. But in this paragraph, you have a very, very specific example of him testing out Rousseau's philosophy. What makes a good essay is not just what it does, but what it also doesn't do. And I've read a lot of essays that use a lot of flowery language, use like these SAT words to try to impress the reader with their vocabulary, when you know that they don't use any of those words in their everyday life or in their writing, etc. This paragraph reads very naturally, and it's very sincere. It's very plain language, right? Believing that he expected as sincere and objective an evaluation as possible, I told him that I thought he was inflexible and stubborn. He didn't, it's not littered with a lot of what I call expensive words, just like it's just very plain. From that moment, his door was forever closed to me for one-on-one meetings. Some things don't need to be fluffed up. Sometimes the reader just wants to know what exactly happened. And this is exactly what this writer does. And it's just great. My only critique is I don't know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. I get that he's just trying to test out his philosophy, or trying to illustrate a situation where he did test out his philosophy, but was the effect of this good or bad? So from that moment his door was forever closed to me for one-on-one meetings, like, is that a good thing? Like, were one-on-one meetings always a bad thing, and so he was able to avoid them altogether? Or was it a bad thing that he never got to talk with this teacher one-on-one? That part is a little bit unclear, but again, that's a minor critique. Okay, so such honesty did not always serve me well. Okay, that seems to imply that what happened in the first paragraph was a good thing, but again, that could be a little bit more clear. But anyway, we'll move on. Such honesty did not always serve me well. On Christmas Eve, as the boys sat around in a circle, solemnly watching the headmaster trim the turkey, it suddenly crossed my mind to worry about the level of personal hygiene. Instead of keeping such thoughts to myself, I was emboldened by Rousseau's endorsement of man's natural promptings and inquired aloud, "Have you washed your hands, sir?" Although it provoked much mirth among my classmates, my candidness brought me in the headmaster's office the following day with an assignment to write an essay on the topic, "Why Arrogance is a Characteristic to be Deplored." Okay, so again, great example of, in this situation, a moment where him testing his newfound philosophy ended up in hot water. Structurally, this is great. The first paragraph introduces the writer that had an influence on him, and I can just tell that the next these paragraphs and also the next one is going to be about specific examples of how that philosophy influenced, or what the actual influence was. How did it change how he lived? I talked before about expensive words like okay, mirth. It stays within the scope of this writer's wheelhouse, this vocabulary. I can tell that these are words that he might actually use. So it doesn't detract from the reading of it. Again, I've read so many essays where there's all these SAT words that just get in the way of what the writer is trying to say. My embrace of man's natural state made me an enemy of all that was sentimental or contrived. During the rehearsal of a school performance of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, I advocated changing the ending of the play so that Snow White does not wake up when the prince kisses her, and shifted the focus of the story to a dwarf who falls in love with the princess rather than the prince. In the climax, when that dwarf who truly loves her kisses, hey presto, magic is dispelled, and forever they live happily ever after. While Prince William screams out, "I kissed the dead body." The audience found this anti-romantic reworking of the play very humorous, and in this instance my dedication to the ideal of the natural man served me well. Okay, so another illustration of how his newfound life philosophy had a good effect. My only thing is, some of these sentences are a bit long. My rule of thumb is to always keep sentences short. The shorter the sentence, the less the reader has to hold concepts in their head while you try to land the plane and finish the sentence. Short sentences really give the reader time to breathe mentally and really digest what you're trying to say. So like in this one, in the climax, when the dwarf truly loves her, this could be 2 sentences. And same with the last one too. During the rehearsal, I advocate changing the ending of the play. So that's this could be split up into 2 sentences as well. I mean, again, minor critique. I was able to follow very well. The good thing, the nice thing about this essay as well is that it's clear that the writer has confidence. And why I know that is that he's willing to not only poke fun at the situation, but also sort of poke fun at himself. He's not afraid of adding humor into the essay. So many essays are so serious. The writers are trying to make themselves sound more stern or add more emotional weight to a certain topic. Memorable essays are essays that will make the reader laugh. In some ways, it's a lot easier to try to enhance drama and seriousness, but it's very hard to fake humor. And when you can do that, when you can really inject that into what you're trying to write, you have a very good chance of making a positive impact on the reader and be memorable. Put yourself in the admissions reader's position. They're reading thousands and thousands of essays. What are you going to remember? A serious essay or an essay that makes you laugh? For me, it's an essay that makes me laugh. And this writer is clearly, not trying to force humor, but is just not being so serious about what he's trying to illustrate. All right, so growing up has inevitably meant accepting many of the social conventions that I rebelled against after reading Rousseau. Yet my previous life as a natural man has left in me a feeling of resentment against pretension, urbanity, and politeness. My natural man is not dead yet. He still lurks under my skin, living and pulsating through my veins. Only difference from before is that he is a little tamed. Okay, so this might be the weakest paragraph, but that's not, it's not saying I'm not trying to say that it's bad. What I like about this paragraph is that it doesn't spend a lot of words trying to illustrate that this is not totally who he is. He's matured, right? But he didn't spend a lot of words explaining or re-explaining that he's grown up. And that this was a phase in his life and it did have an influence, but now he's not really this way anymore. That's sometimes one sentence or two sentences is all you need. And so this is great. This is a great way of just landing the plane, keeping the focus on all of the previous paragraphs without trying to detract or contradict what he just wrote. He's just saying that, hey, he matured. And that's great. Like I said before, I like that he doesn't use too much pretentious language. Okay, so for example, my natural man is not dead yet. He still lurks under my skin, living and pulsating through my veins. I could see somebody else who's trying to quote unquote impress the reader by saying, something like, my natural man is not dead yet. He lies in a dormant state, waiting to be resurrected at a moment's notice. It's like something like contrived and pretentious like that. It can be very easy to try to make something sound a lot more dramatic than it is, but he's just saying, he says enough. He does enough. Lurks under my skin, living and pulsating through my veins. I mean, that's great. Like I get that he's trying to use vivid imagery. It's a classic play, but doesn't detract. He uses it well. Only difference from before, again, minor grammatical issue, like the only difference would be better from before is that he is a little tamed. This is great. And I can also tell, I don't know what the word count is. Yeah, I just checked the word count, and this is only 505 words. This kid has confidence. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to try to max out the word limit on a Common App essay, but what this tells me is that he knows that he's said enough. He doesn't need another 100 or 150 words to tell us what he wants to tell us. That's perfect. And it's also a quick read. There's so many essays out there that are trying to cram a 700 or 800 word essay down into 650, and you can sort of tell it because there's a lot of disjointed topics. They're trying to say a lot about themselves, but they know they don't have the space for it. And so the essay that you get is sort of this mishmash of different topics. But this is very simple. He's just talking about, hey, Rousseau had a huge impact on me. Here's 3 specific instances where I illustrate that, and I show, and that's who I was. It sort of still is who I am, but I've matured. That's great. What else do you need to say? And again, I have to just say this one more time. Don't try to put so many complicated, expensive SAT words in your essay. Don't try to force it. Just write. I always tell people, write as if you're just talking to somebody, because that's what you're doing with these essays. You're talking to an actual human reader. For engagement, I'll give it a 9 out of 10. It instantly had me hooked, wasted no time in getting to the point, and I also enjoyed the humor that he injected throughout the essay. One minor criticism would be that his first paragraph had a sentence that was 4 lines long, and it could have easily just been 2 sentences without the semicolon. For engineering, I'll give it a 9 out of 10. The structure is clear. Each paragraph focuses on specific instances that support his main point very well. My only criticism is that his paragraphs could have transitioned a bit better between each one, particularly between the second and third paragraphs, but that's a minor criticism. For execution, I'll give it an 8 out of 10. There were some sentences that could have been shorter, and there were some minor grammatical errors, but overall, it was very well written. He used just the right amount of SAT words, and his sentences were simple and easy to read. Which means that overall, I'd give this draft an 8.5 out of 10. It's already a very solid essay, and it's no surprise to me that this essay, along with the rest of his resume, impressed the admissions team at the University of Chicago and other top schools. So, I hope you enjoyed this review, and again, if you'd like me to read and review your essay, be sure to submit it using the link in the description. See you in the next one.